are you ready?
I am. Mr. Bacon?
Here.
Let me
Okay.
start the meeting. Welcome to the February meeting of the Germantown Planning Commission. And if Mrs. Rush would please call the roll.
Mr. Bacon?
Here.
Mr. Saunders?
Here.
Ms. Hicks?
Here.
Mr. Marsh?
Here.
Mr. Hernandez?
Here.
Alderman Owens?
Here.
Mr. Clark?
Here.
Chairman Harms?
Here, and we have a quorum for tonight's meeting. We have copies of the agenda on the podiums. If anyone would like a copy, please feel free to come forward and help yourself. First order of business is approval of the minutes from our last meeting. Are there any additions, subtractions, modifications to the minutes? If not, do we have a motion for approval?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Bacon and second from Mrs. Hicks. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bacon?
Yes.
Ms. Hicks?
Yes.
Mr. Saunders?
Yes.
Mr. Hernandez?
Yes.
Mr. Marsh?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Chairman Harms?
Yes, and the minutes from January are approved. We are ready for our first agenda item. Mr. Ross, you and the staff have a presentation to make.
Mr. Chairman? I'm going
Yes.
to recuse myself on the first item, so I'll step out.
Commissioner Marsh is asking for recusal from this agenda item. Thank you, sir. If you'll step out.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the Commission. The first item on tonight's agenda is for the approval of a 140-foot tall wireless transmission facility in the R District at Dogwood Elementary School. Applicants are represented tonight. Mr. Mike Fay is here, as well as representatives from the school district. This is the Dogwood Elementary site. As you can see, it is surrounded by residential. I want to point out, though, that this is fire station number 2, this smaller parcel, and then this parcel back here is Dogwood Park. As we looked at this application, also before I get into the details, I want to show you this map. This is the area immediately around it. This is the approximate location of Dogwood Elementary School here, and you can see that there are several little dots on the map. Those dots are other wireless transmission facilities, and there is a gap in that area. At this point, I'd like to get into a little bit of background. As stated in the application and the materials, this is zoned R residential for single family, and you do have the Dogwood Elementary School there that was built in 1985, transferred to the school district, Germantown School District, in 2014. And then the portable classrooms that are back there were installed in 2017. On behalf of T-Mobile, Prime Development Group represents the school district to propose this new tower on the southern portion of the site. This is, as mentioned, fire station here, park here. Park does have some facilities that go onto the school site. This request is for a 140-foot tall monopine with the ability to accommodate up to 4 carriers. The cell tower will be placed east of the classroom in a 30 by 90 equipment enclosure, which will have a 6-foot tall fence that will also have a tree buffer to separate it out from the surrounding area. This modification for the buffer in front of the facility has been made since the meeting with the neighbors on January 8th, as well as the subcommittee. The request, based on feedback that they got at the community meeting, was to limit the landscaping spilling out into this play area, consolidate it around it, have some more evergreen trees so that it could look like this, and that play area could still be accessible for free play at the school, as well as free play from the community that enjoys that open field behind the fire station and adjacent to the school site. The school district's Board of Education approved this item at their September 25th regular meeting. The use on appeal, which is the first step for a cell tower to move forward in a residential district, was heard and approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals in December of 2018. The request is compatible with our existing plans, 2030 document that supports technology strategic objectives that includes a citywide technological infrastructure that supports and sustains individual educational, government, and business demands. You can look at the maps that were provided by T-Mobile as part of their application. This is the current coverage. Red is not good in this case. Once you put in a new tower, you can see the addition of just T-Mobile coverage moving to less red, more green and yellow in this area. When you look at how this is compatible with our zoning code, 2386 H5C says that new towers need to be designed for multi-tenants. This, again, as stated previously, has room for 4, including T-Mobile. Wireless transmission facilities must be approved as a use on appeal in residential districts. As stated, that was done in December. It also describes in 2386H specific requirements that the parcel must have a minimum 200-foot public street frontage. The tower must be set back from property lines a minimum distance of the height plus 10 feet. In this case, they've also provided documentation from structural engineers as required by the ordinance that this is a collapsible tower, that if some catastrophe happened and this tower to fall over, it would collapse in on itself and not just tip over like a redwood falling in the forest. They've also provided engineering documentations that this meets the ANSI standards for radio frequency emissions. They have also provided minimum buffer strip on the outer perimeter of the property. They've also included equipment setback over 50 feet from the outdoor perimeter. Any recommendations from the city, including denser, higher landscaping, has been complied with. They've provided 2 layers of landscaping on the drawing, as we previously noted. These plans have been reviewed by the city's technical advisory committee, and the applicant is addressing these issues as part of their construction plan documents that could move forward after assuming approval tonight. We have received 3 letters of concern, possibly more since my notes were written. Those have all been added to your online packet that is available on the city's website as well. Other examples of wireless transmission facilities near schools. You've got an existing cell tower that's within one of the MLGW transmission towers next to Houston High School that is 347 feet from a school building. You have a newly proposed cell tower next to Madonna Learning Center that is 75 feet from the school building that's been approved by the Planning Commission and is awaiting contract approval from the BMA. The next steps, if approved tonight, is that the DRC would approve the fencing, landscaping, and aesthetics of the tower, and the BMA would approve any development contract. Again, this is that existing cell tower along the MLGW. You've got several of these that are within this Greenway transmission line area adjacent to Houston High School. As part of your consideration of approval of this, the city attorney has provided to staff as well as to all of the commissioners the specific citations of the Telecommunications Act and the FCC regulations, which does regulate wireless communication installations, and it excludes environmental, safety, and health concerns as reasons to deny local permits for transmitting antennas. And it specifically states that no state or local government or instrumentality thereof may regulate the placement, construction, and modification of personal wireless facilities on the basis or the environmental effects of radio frequency emissions to the extent that such facilities comply with the Commission's regulations concerning such emissions. This doesn't necessarily state that we aren't totally preempted from rejecting those cell towers, but when you consider those FCC regulations along with the Tennessee Code annotated, the rejection must be based on substantial evidence, and the Sixth Circuit Court has stated that substantial evidence be declared to not include lay testimony from neighbors related to home values that's based on the Cellco case, or lay testimony on potential health effects that's based on the Telespectrum case that can be provided upon any request. We can look at the aesthetics, and as outlined, that is the next step to consider the aesthetics at the Design Review Commission. Our Assistant City Attorney, Mr. Robert McLean, if he'd like to add anything else, just in case I missed anything, but that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Mr. McLean.
Robert McLean was Garrison Bango, Assistant City Attorney. I did the research on the issue of the FCC regulation. It's quite clear that the federal regulations preempt local laws and regulations dealing with the placement of cell phone towers. When you talk about environmental issues that have to do with health care, with health concerns, it has to do with concern of radio frequency transmission and its effects on the health of people, then that's not something that would be considered by local governments and zoning ordinances. So it's quite clear. If you want to take a look at a case, you can read Cellular Phone Task Force versus FCC 205 Fed 382 2000. It goes into great detail about what the FCC has done and what is entitled to under the statute of regulations. So, quite correct, Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. McLean.
Chairman Harless, I did want to, I mixed up a couple of my notes up here, so wanted
Certainly.
to add just a couple of other things.
Please.
As part of our review of this application and working with the city's Information Technology Office and in partnership with the school, we did identify this area as an area of need, as I mentioned earlier in my application. Part of the need falls around emergency, EMS, and other needs. Specifically, within the city of Germantown, 76% of our 911 calls are generated from some type of mobile device. And this area having a lower coverage, that is a safety issue as the city sees it and as the school district would agree. We provided some infrastructure to boost that technology, but a cellular antenna, as was demonstrated by the T-Mobile apps, will change that coverage significantly for that cellular provider. And when you start to add in the other major carriers, you can see a significant improvement in that area. some of the information that's transmitted, this isn't just about calls, it's about the transmission of information. Just as an example of information that's transmitted through an ambulance call, those hospital records are transmitted to the paramedics in the field over a wireless network so that they can understand, for example, if anyone's got allergies or other health-related issues for their treatment in the field. So having the ability to transmit this information and serve the safety needs of our community through increased data capacity as well as cellular coverage for calls is something that we also see important as consideration of this application.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Would the applicant like to make a presentation? If you'd state your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael Fay of the Prime Development Group, 7520 Capitol Drive, Germantown, Tennessee. Ladies and gentlemen, when we met with you at the subcommittee, you asked us to make changes to the plans. All of those changes, to my knowledge, and I think as per Cameron's presentation, have been made. We did change the alley or the drive in the back to an asphalt surface. Landscaping was modified to create the dual layer of buffering that you'd requested. When we look at this particular site, we think it's imperative that we all remember one thing, that the beneficiary of these funds is our school system. This isn't going to a private owner, this is going to our school system. And that school system obviously can use every dime it can get. We also believe that in this particular site, it's been tucked away into the corner, so it does not have the impact that some of the neighbors had said in our neighborhood meeting that they were concerned about. We believe, based on the topography, on the maps, and on the information that's been provided to us, that this is the best location that can be found in this area. And in addition to Cameron's point, this particular tower will be serving T-Mobile and Verizon. Both of those two entities are willing to go on this thing as soon as it's ready, due to, as we all know, our less than stellar coverage that we have in town right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fay. Commissioners, questions?
Just a quick, because you both commented on it. I mean, this is one of the, you don't really call it a black hole, but I mean, this is one of the probably most, from the standpoint of service, challenged areas in the city, correct?
Mr. Bacon, my wife would say my house in Germantown is the worst, but when you look at the maps, it is a void. What ends up happening is when you go into those areas that are red, the call will drop.
Right.
And that, and talking with a friend whose children walk home from school, mom loves to watch that app that sees where they are, and then all of a sudden, the kid just moved 1,000 feet in a second. That's what happens. That drop is what causes that problem.
And then I'm glad you noted the applicant is GMSD. So the school system is the applicant. So
Yes,
it's been completely, from their standpoint, completely vetted. This is not something that's being.
We've been working with the school system on this site for 2 years. Vetted is a nice word.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
Commissioners, other questions? Commissioner Hicks, can you tell us about the coverage at the school at the present time?
I'm probably not the only commission member who can talk about the lack of coverage. No, there's no coverage. You don't get a text. You don't get any notifications when you're inside Dogwood, at least with AT&T.
Okay. Mr. Fay, with the improvement of T-Mobile and Verizon going on to this tower, if it's approved, what will be the increase of coverage as a percent compared to where it is today? Ballpark.
Well, as we stand today, when you're in that hole, we are close to zero. It will go up significantly. I'm not sure there's a way to quantify it. You know, as the map showed, it went from red to green. As we've told this body before when we dealt with the Madonna, it is imperative that these towers, if they go in, serve 4 carriers. This tower's been designed to do that. So in answering, I think, an indirect question, we're all hoping, I'm pretty sure that as towers are available, carriers it's a much more inexpensive way for a carrier to add on rather than buying land, building a tower, just adding their antennas into the facility. And they're also dealing with a company that's a Memphis-based company that has a reputation to do what they say they're going to do.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Fay. Commissioners, any other questions? If not, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this project? Please come forward. If you will, state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Thomas Clayton, and I live at 7936 Thornbrook Cove, Germantown, Tennessee, 38138, and I've lived there since January 1979. I appreciate the board giving me the opportunity to express my views on the subject wireless tower installation proposed in this meeting. Here are the points I want to make to support my position asking for approval. The demand for wireless service increases daily in Germantown. With a higher density, i.e. Thornwood, and more people discontinuing their landline and going to rely on wireless service. Wireless availability needs to keep up. Individuals with embedded transmitting medical devices rely on the reliability of a wireless service. I am one of those individuals with an embedded device that monitors the function of my heart, and through a wireless connection, the data is transmitted to Cardiovascular Center at Stern. The availability of wireless service is a key factor here, and it is not communicated to a landline. And no service or dead area or multiples thereof are a detriment to obtain emergency help when needed. With time being of the essence, one doesn't have the luxury of hunting for a signal. With Germantown recently receiving an ISO 1 rating, in case you're not familiar or aware of ISO, it's an acronym for Public Protection Classification Program, and centers primarily on the quality of the fire department protection afforded to citizens. This rating not only pertains to the physical plant and equipment, but the ability to communicate the need for service with the fire department. An audit by Zen GRC, the awarder of the rating, finding areas with the municipality lacking the ability to communicate could adversely affect that rating. Germantown is one of, like, I think at 2014, there were 60 municipalities in the U.S. that had that #1 rating. That you don't want to lose. The end goal here is to provide the protection and safety to the citizens through the best means available. The cell tower needs to be approved. Please keep the welfare and safety of the citizenry in mind when making your decision. Again, I'm asking for your approval of the subject, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clayton. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this project? Please state your name and address for the record.
Hank Wright, 2355 Duntreath Road here in Germantown. I live about a mile and a half east of the school. We have actually good service at our home. So I'm not here selfishly to speak for the tower. It won't help me personally, but, and I have young children, I shouldn't at my age, but I do, but we have children that have been to Dogwood, and I just think that we have to look at this from a mitigation of risk. And I think the risk is higher. You know, our children can't be away from cell service anywhere they go, even if, phones in their hands. So I honestly think from an emergency first responders perspective and our ability to contact them if our wife or children or family are in a wreck or hit by a car or any of that, that's why I'm in support. I have some dear friends that are here that are against it, and I respect them so much, and that's my position. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this project? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this project? If you will, let's start over here on the left side and work our way around. I'm going to remind you that two things. One, you've got 3 minutes. If there's several of you who want to say the same thing, I'd hope that you'd just maybe have a spokesman. And the second thing is, you've heard the city attorney talk about the EMF emissions, and that is not something that should be discussed here because we can't do anything about it. So with that said, we'll start over here on the far left, and if you'll come forward and state your name and address for the record. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Robbie Davis. I live at 2830 Waterleaf Drive here in Germantown. I retired from Legacy Shelby County Schools after 30 years of service as a speech-language pathologist. I worked in Collierville for 24 years, and my last 3 years were spent at Farmington, 1 year at Riverdale here in Germantown. I thought everybody knew you don't put cell towers on a school property. I've spent hours and hours searching for information on a website called ehtrust.org. As to why we are all sitting here tonight, I have learned that there's a colossal amount of science, both old and new, that tells us wireless radiation is dangerous to our biology.
Mrs. Davis, I'm going to cut you off right here because, again, you're talking about something that we have no control over. We cannot vote to turn this down or approve it based on the EFC emissions. That is not something that we have purview over. So if you want to talk about this and be in opposition to it, then it needs to be something other than the admissions issue. And we've got the city attorney here, and he's quoted the FCC regulations on this.
Well, yes, sir, I'm aware of those FC regulations. They're based on, the health effects are based on thermal effects, not biological effects. And I realize that you can't make a judgment on that. But this is something very passionate that you're about to do that I'm not sure you're aware of the science that's out there that eventually will prevail, Mr. Harless.
Now, I understand your comments.
So you're telling me to sit down?
I'm saying that in your discussion, talking about admissions is not something that we have any control over as far as approving or disapproving.
I'm aware of that. I'm very aware of the FCC regulations, and when they were decided, they haven't been updated in the last 30 years. Our world is so different from wireless, with wireless technology, and if you're going to tell me to sit down, then I'll sit down, but if you will provide me the opportunity to speak, I would like to. Well, especially since I've was in education for 35 years and actually worked in your schools out here.
Well, we appreciate your 35 years of service as a teacher. That's something special. My wife was a teacher, so I certainly understand that. I'm going to allow one person to speak on this issue, okay? Originally, we weren't going to do it. If you're the spokesman for this issue, or if there's someone else in the audience who feels that they're more passionate about it or want to speak, we'll listen to one person on this issue.
Well, if you would let me finish, then
Mrs. Davis, please go right ahead.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate that, and I understand your position and understand what you're telling me, but my heart can't go sit down if there's any way you're going to let me talk.
Please do, and I understand the passion of a teacher.
Thank you. I have learned, I was saying there's a colossal amount of science about wireless radiation being dangerous to our body, our biology. This science appears to be far beyond the scope of the American Cancer Society. And I do believe that this science will ultimately prevail as the FCC will have to change their guidelines. I would like to submit some doctor's letters to you, however, that may be moot at this point.
Well, you're welcome to submit them to the Planning Commission. They'll be happy to take them for you.
Okay. I'd like to read one letter in particular, if I could, just excerpts from it, and then I'll close.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Martha Herbert is a pediatric neurologist in neuroscience on the faculty of Harvard Medical School and on staff at Mass General Hospital. She has extensive history of research and clinical practice in neurodevelopmental disorders, particularly autism spectrum disorders. In this letter, she writes about her research and a potential link between autism and EMFs. Dr. Herbert writes that EMFs can certainly contribute to the degrading physiological integrity of the system at cellular and molecular level, and this in turn appears to contribute to the pathogenesis, causation, not only of autism but other common chronic illnesses. She makes reference to thousands of papers that document adverse health and neurological impacts. She also writes that Wi-Fi from cell towers can exert a disorganizing effect on the ability to learn and remember, and can also be destabilizing to immune and metabolic function. This will make it harder for some children to learn, particularly those who are already having learning or medical problems in the first place. And since half our children in this country have some type of chronic illness, this means a lot of people are more susceptible than you might think. EMF sensitivity is a real thing, and this Dr. Herbert is saying that special needs populations are the most sensitive. After working in special ed for 35 years, I foresee some very real issues ahead for the school system if this tower is placed on school property, issues that they appear to be very unaware of. EMF safe zones may be very difficult to accomplish with the tower right outside the door. I beg you to look at the larger national and global community's responses to Wi-Fi reduction in schools. These are people who have accepted the science and are acting responsibly for their children. Please don't throw this school under the bus. Find another place for your tower. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Hollers, for letting me talk.
Thank you, Mrs. Davis. Appreciate your passion. Okay. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this? Please come forward, state your name and address. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Jennifer Bell, 2111 Prestwick Drive. I attended that meeting at Dogwood on, I believe it was the 8th, someone said. This tower has changed locations since that community meeting. It was further away from the school, and now I'm seeing that it has been moved closer to the school. This is way too close to our children. And I oppose this decision to place a cell tower on the Dogwood property. I'm asking you to find another location for the tower. If the law does not allow us to turn down this plan based on health effects, then find another reason to turn it down, knowing in your heart that there are health effects. I would like you to know about some current and recent legal cases in the U.S. In 2004, there was a study involving a group of firefighters who could not function on the job after a cell tower was put on their station. They had severe headaches, inability to sleep, cognitive impairment, infertility, immune suppression with flu-like symptoms, and colds, depression, and anxiety. SPECT scans showed brain abnormalities in all the firefighters tested, specifically a pervasive hyperexcitability of the neurons, which suggested the exposure was causing the neurons to continually fire without benefit of rest. Without rest, the brain neurons die. Their tower was measured at 1/1000th of the allowed limit set by the FCC. All of these men were fit and strong and not on the hazmat team. Imagine if fit, strong men can fall ill to cell tower radiation. What about young developing children?
Ma'am.
This is a legal case, and I'm telling you the circumstances of the legal case.
We've had
These firefighters fought in court to have California fire stations exempted from tower placement, and they won exemption. Cell towers cannot be placed on fire stations in California. A lawsuit filed December 21st of 2018 by the Santa Fe Alliance for Public Health and Safety against the City of Santa Fe and the U.S. government for harms from RF radiation and proposed 5G installations. The complaint thoroughly documents
Ms.
not
Bowe,
only...
Thank you, ma'am. I've given you leeway.
I'm telling you about legal precedents.
But you're talking about EMFs, and we're not here to discuss those.
Okay.
Your comment
Then I'm going
about-
to skip down to, please realize that any financial benefit that the school district is receiving from renting this land to Tower Ventures may be lost if legal action is taken against the school district in the years to come. Please think very carefully about the long-term legal, financial, and public health ramifications of this decision. Please find a way to kill this deal before our children and community have to suffer the consequences of the school board's bad decision.
Thank you, ma'am. Do we have anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition? Anyone else? Commissioners, do we have any final questions, comments?
Just a question, if I could, for Mr. Fay, I suppose, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Alderman? Right ahead.
You guys, I see the setbacks, and has this site plan changed from the initial submittal?
The only change that we made to the site plan was staff asked us to actually move the tower further away from the original location, so it's actually further. As you can see in the plan, it was centered in the compound, then we moved it about, I guess, 10 or 15 feet west. So it's actually further from the school than the original plan. In the original plan, it was actually in the center of the compound.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, one more question. The landscaping shown here on this plan, is that going to be irrigated?
Yes, it is. That's actually not the final landscape plan, but it's probably the best one. It's a colored plan. It does show that there are 2 layers of landscaping, and that it also calls out that there are evergreen trees. The elevation that you see does call out the correct trees. Nellie Stevens and Clay Arrows, and then various oaks and other trees.
With irrigation?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Commissioner Clark, do you have a question?
I had a question for Mr. Ross. Ms. Bell brought up a good point about legal ramifications to GMSD in the future or possible. In subcommittee meeting, you spoke about a case where we had an issue with a cell tower that was, I guess, declined in the past. Can you shed light on that?
So in 2012, I believe it was 2012 or 2013, the city's Board of Zoning Appeals turned down the request for a cell tower facility at Faith Presbyterian Church. The tower provider subsequently sued the city for turning down based on the case law that was cited earlier. The city lost that case, and the applicant was given the opportunity to reapply to the city. They, after 2 years of going through court, did not end up reapplying with the city.
Thank you, Mr. Ross.
Thank you. Any other questions, commissioners? If not, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, the subcommittee met on January 16th, 2019, and Subdivision Site Plan Review Subcommittee, and recommended that the application be placed on the next Planning Commission agenda for action, subject to the subcommittee discussion, comments in the staff report, and the plans and documents filed with the application. On January 23rd, 2019, the applicant submitted revised plans which addressed some of the TAC comments. The proposed motion before us tonight is the approval of a 140-foot tall wireless transmission facility cell tower at Dogwood Elementary School, 8945 Dogwood Road, subject to the comments and conditions listed above in the plans and documents submitted with the application.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Hernandez had second on that, and please call the roll.
Ms. Hicks?
This application is from GMSD, and they're tasked with taking care of our children every single day. So my concern for what happens in the ability for those people inside that building to reach fire and emergency officials overrides any concerns that might have been brought by health, which I understand those are out there. So I vote yes.
Mr. Clark?
I'm kind of echoing Mrs. Hicks. I live in the area, and I have kids that live in that go to Dogwood School. I appreciate Ms. Davis and others who have brought information forth for us to see. I actually read all those and watched videos to my family's chagrin while I'm sitting there watching videos at the house about cell phone towers. But as we were indicated, we're not in a position to vote on this based on health concerns and these other reasons previously stated. So just based on the zoning and the aesthetics of the tower, I'm going to approve this as well.
Alderman Owens?
Yeah, I've struggled with this as well, like David. I've got a daughter who goes to Dogwood Elementary, and I'm fully aware that we've got coverage issues in the area. What I go back to is that this tower, as proposed, meets all the requirements of our wireless transmission facility ordinance. That includes height, setback, fall zone, and so then I go to what our city attorney has provided us, and if I can be brief, read this again. We cannot reject this based on any evidence that has to deal with environmental safety and health concerns as a reason to deny local permits for transmitting antennas. And so, as a result of that, I feel we're somewhat hamstrung, but I also agree with Commissioner Hicks. I think GMSD has looked at this, and they feel it is a safe thing for our kids, and so I'm trusting them as well, and I vote yes.
Mr. Hernandez.
Also, yes.
Mr. Bacon.
I agree with the comments my fellow commissioners have made. I had 2 kids that went to Dogwood, not there anymore. But I think that the life safety issues relative to not having coverage can be such that far outweigh what still is a significant debate on the health issues. So, you know, it is a very dark area, and the fact that in that school there's no cell coverage, I think is very, very significant. So I'm voting yes.
Mr. Saunders.
Echoing the same thing that my fellow commissioners have indicated, I also want to point out that I do have a son that's been with the city of Germantown Fire Department in 25 years plus, now in charge of taking care of getting the equipment that's needed to service our citizens. And one of the biggest responsibilities that the fire service and police has now is being able to get data quickly on the units that they have to be able to provide us with the service we need. And I think their cell towers are something that we need. We have them located not only in our school areas, we have them in our parks, we have a couple of them in our fire stations, so it meets all the requirements, so I'll be voting yes.
Chairman Harless.
First, I'd like to thank everyone in attendance for your passion, both pro and con. I think it was a good dialogue, and I appreciate everybody's participation. I am voting yes because I believe that having good cell phone service anywhere in a city our size with the amenities that we have is paramount. 911, ambulance service, fire service, it happens on a daily basis, and shame on us if we don't have good coverage. So I vote yes. And with that, it is approved. The motion is approved. Thank you, everyone. If you'd like to stay for our next project, you're more than welcome to. Otherwise, we'll take a 3-minute recess to let those people clear out. Mr. Ross, are you ready with your presentation?
Thank you again, Chairman Harless, members of the commission. Second item on our agenda tonight is the Skinner property at the northwest quadrant of Poplar Avenue and Forest Hill Irene Road. The request in front of you tonight is a rezoning of 2 parcels from the AG Agriculture and RE Residential Estate to C2 General Commercial. This is the zoning map of the area. The AG is the triangle area, and then the polygon remaining is the RE area to be zoned. This is the annexation history, just briefly. A portion of it was annexed in December of '82. In June of '82, the development contract for the Exxon station was approved. In March of '83, there were several areas rezoned. 2.07 acres was rezoned as from C2 to AG, and a smaller area, 0.2, was rezoned from AG to C2. And then in December of '84, we annexed the remaining area of the site as part of a larger tract of annexation that was overall 37.5 acres. And then in December of 1988, the city approved a development contract for the Bank, Tennessee building that sits just north of the Exxon station on Forest Hill Irene. Just a little bit of background before I move on. The Poplar Avenue and Forest Hill Irene roads are classified as major arterial roads. In the surrounding area, looking at the land use, you've got Stone Creek area directly south of the site in the southwest quadrant of Poplar and Forest Hill Irene, and that's been developed with retail and commercial uses. Village shop, and also has some office uses associated with it. Village Shops of Forest Hill Shopping Center is primarily retail uses, and that's in the southeast quadrant of the intersection. And then you have vacant land in, that is zoned office and office campus at the northeastern quadrant of Forest Hill and Poplar. When we consider this application and its compatibility with relevant documents, we started first with the Germantown Economic Development Strategic Plan, which was approved by the city in September of 2012. In that strategic plan, it identified 5 commercial nodes to be considered as key commercial areas and focusing our economic development strategies on improving, strengthening, and ensuring the sustainability of these commercial centers in our area. It starts with the Central Business District, where we are now, West Poplar Avenue District, the Wolf River District, you've got the Forest Hill Heights District, and then the East Poplar Avenue District. Just looking a little bit closer with these, this is something that I pulled directly from our economic development marketing material. And again, these areas are called out in our marketing material as areas that are identified as our key commercial areas. This is the outline of the Poplar Avenue East District. When you look at the 2015 Germantown Forward 2030 plan and the economic development strategic objectives within that plan, this application fulfills strategic objectives 1 and 2. 1 being economic development practices support economic sustainability, and 2, economic development policies encourage investment in key commercial areas. So when we take all of that and start to consider the history of this property, we talked about, I spoke already of the current recorded plat and its relation to the annexation. Then you look at the existing conditions that we've talked about at the intersection. You have the Exxon station, the Bank, Tennessee, and then you have Mr. Skinner's properties that are these other 3 parcels associated with this. When you as a board are considering the proposed rezoning in front of you, which is for approximately 1.82 acres of residential estate to commercial and 1.86 acres of agriculture to commercial. The changes can be granted on either of 2 conditions: that there was a mistake in the original zoning or that there has been a change in the neighborhood. When you consider the criteria as it relates to a change in the neighborhood, those changes are changes in population, both of the area that is proposed to be rezoned and the surrounding areas, the changes in existing road patterns or traffic that can include traffic volumes and also includes the development of new roadways in the vicinity, the need for the rezoning based upon changes in whatever is classified as the neighborhood, which may not be necessarily limited to what one would think of as a concise area, and those may include changes in the population, changes in development trends, and changes in the existing character of nearby property and or changes that have occurred in the character of that nearby property. And then finally, the effect of the requested change in zoning on adjoining or nearby property. Also provided within the application requirements, section 23404, a sketch plan or a concept plan of the potential development is required of any rezoning application and must indicate how the property may be developed for the intended use while meeting the requirements of the requested zoning district with regard to building setback lines, building height, buffers, landscaping, and parking requirements. This is the conceptual site plan that was provided by the applicant. Any approval by this Planning Commission and subsequent approval, if done by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, does not signify nor does it imply the approval of the proposed concept or sketch plan for this subject property. If this rezoning is approved by the Planning Commission, the applicant must then go through a 3-reading process that includes a public hearing at the Board of Mayor and Aldermen for their consideration and potential approval of the rezoning. At that point, the applicant has the ability to submit for the review and approval of Planning Commission and Economic and Community Development staff, including engineering, planning, economic development, and code compliance, plans for development of the site. Elements of the concept plan that do not comply with the zoning ordinance and that have not been taken into consideration with comments to the city engineer, and they're not revised on the plan as recommended by the TAC comments that were also provided as part of this application, considering some of the things that we can identify in our cursory look at this, must be corrected or added or justified before it is submitted to the Planning Commission for consideration. At this point, that concludes our presentation of this application. This is a complete application that has been provided to you, and at this point, staff does recommend approval of the zone change.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Commissioners, questions of staff? Mr. Ross, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Hernandez.
Mr. Hernandez, could I get you to turn on your mic?
You could.
Thank you.
Could you just review this slide and then the following one in a little more detail for us?
Certainly. So again, these are the 5 key commercial areas that were identified initially in the 2012 Economic Development Strategic Plan and subsequently approved for consideration as part of a 2013 Economic Development Work Plan to focus on creating policies and encouraging investments that increase the sustainability of these commercial areas and focus our economic development areas in these 5 commercial areas, not the expansion of these areas, but these 5 areas. And this was the area that was identified, including the outlined area, as the East Poplar Avenue District. This was what was approved as part of that 2012 and 2013 work plan, and was subsequently moved forward as part of the key commercial areas designated in the 2015 Forward 2030 plan. And you can see that the site location is on the western edge of this Poplar Avenue East District. You can see that the border went all the way up to cover the entirety of Mr. Skinner's approximately 10-acre property. The request in front of you tonight, again, is just over 3 acres of his total 10, and back to alignment with our Forward 2030 plan. Did I touch on? Okay.
Commissioners, questions?
Mr. Ross, I have a quick, would you go back to the slide, the aerial? Just a point of clarity. So the site location where the text is immediately to the east, that zoning is not commercial. That existing zoning is office commercial. Could you just in a nutshell describe office commercial? I think we all understand fundamentally
office campus.
Or office campus, I'm sorry.
So the corner at Forest Hill, Irene, and Poplar, so approximately this area here is zoned just straight office. And that allows for a variety of uses, but lower in the commercial intensity. And then office campus is this larger area, and that is an office park. Something similar would be Lennox Center here in the area. But as part of that zoning, you have buffers that are required on the backside, and this application recognized in its concept plan the requirement of buffers as well.
Commissioners? Commissioner Marsh?
Could you, the portion of the site that's zoned AG currently, about how large is that site, and give us some insight on what potential uses are in place? And do we have any historical context or indication of what the original intentions might have been when this property was annexed?
So at the, I'll start with the area. The area that is currently zoned agriculture, 1.86 acres approximately. Under the agriculture zoning guidelines within our zoning ordinance, you have to have first a minimum of 5 acres to be able to conduct agriculture activities that are including but not limited to the growing of crops, the handling of animals, everything from chickens to pigs to donkeys, you name it, you can put it out there if you have 5 acres. And then the storing of what else you can put on it that you've produced on it. The intent in 1983, based on, and I'm paraphrasing the minutes here, but it was included in your packet, is that the zones would be shifted around until such time as an application came forward to rezone this property. So that was in 1983, and here we are in 2019 considering a rezoning for this application. So that's the subsequent time that has passed. This property has been in ownership of Mr. Skinner's family for over 50 years. I think he stated at the subcommittee that it had been in his family's ownership for 90 years. I don't have it on exact authority, but I have it on good authority that this corner has been operating as corner stores in this area since the 20s. I did note in my presentation that it was 1982 when the contract for the Exxon station was approved, and that was June of '82, which was prior to the annexation in December of '82.
And just to be clear, at the time the property was annexed, and in the minutes you referenced the corner was zone commercial, and then the section behind that where the bank building is was relatively recently following that, or not long after that, zoned for commercial use. At that time, the property across the street was, what was the status of the property on the south side in the 80s? That wasn't developed as it is today, correct?
It was not developed as it is today. That started to change in 2006 with the developments of Stone Creek Center and the office developments that have been added since then.
But this corner at that, it has, at least since the early 80s, been a commercial corner.
Yes, sir. And the zoning, I'm going to approximate lines here, but the zoning here is the C2, and to the west is office zoning in this approximate area on the south side of Poplar.
Thank you.
Commissioners, other questions?
I just had a follow-up question that.
Sorry, Commissioner Clark.
Mr. Ross commented that you have to have a minimum of 5 acres in agriculture zoning to perform agriculture holding livestock or whatever it may be. So with this piece only being 1.86 acres in zoned ag, what can you do?
I don't believe you can do much.
So you can't hold pigs or chickens or anything on there according to our ordinances at 1.86 acres?
We could not find in the minutes or any hard copy records that we have from that period of time any grandfathering of opportunity for growing anything on there, doing anything as a non-compliant lot, as a 1.86 acre lot.
Okay.
And so those uses also include the construction of a single-family home on that 1.86 acres. One of the recommendations of staff, just to sort of elaborate on what happens if you leave this kind of stuff out, our recommendation to Mr. Skinner, if this is approved, is the consolidation of these 3 parcels, because you would leave an illegal lot here because this is 1/3 of an acre, this is just under 2 acres here, and then he's got his remaining parcel where his house is. So in order to not make more illegal lots in this area under the remaining RE zoning, this would need to be combined into a larger 7+ acre lot, and then this 3 acres, just above 3 acres, would need to remain the C2. But you can see that they've left a hook over here of RE before it hits the next adjoining property, because this smaller parcel is also Mr. Skinner's property.
So are his plans to leave that RE?
Yes, his plans are to leave that RE. The little small piece, but again, on any final plat that is filed for this rezoning and subsequent development, it's a requirement of staff and noted within our comments that this needs to be consolidated into one lot, one parcel, so that you don't leave any non-conforming illegal lots.
Is there any kind of buffer on this property like there is on the property to the east?
There is no specific requirement other than what's required by the ordinance, which is a minimum of 25 and a maximum of 50.
So there is a 25-foot buffer there?
They included a 25-foot buffer as part of their concept plan. And then when you consider the drive aisle, that's a non-developed area. You know, one can argue that that's not necessarily a buffer, but one can also argue that the remainder of Mr. Skinner's property is another 200+ feet of buffer across to the closest neighbor on Grove Forest Cove.
Mr. Ross, the property due south of the property that we're discussing is O or commercial?
It's O here, and then on the other side of this entrance drive, you've got C2 commercial.
Okay.
So they are for all intents and purposes, squaring this up on the existing zoning map to make a square of commercial general.
Thank you.
No offhand is, I guess, Germantown Collection is C2, correct? Should be.
Germantown Collection is SC1, but that was its zoning prior to the application of Smart Code. It's now T5, as well as the rest of the area. However, if you go north of Germantown Collection, so the parcels where the Baptist Rehab is, and then those office and retail condominium locations, those are their zoning prior to Smart Code was C2, and that does back up directly to R-zoned residential properties.
Commissioners, other questions? If not, does the applicant wish to make a presentation?
Good evening. My name is Harvey Markham. I'm with a Reeves firm. My address is 6800 Poplar Avenue, Suite 101. My residence is 8386 East Wicklow Way in Germantown, Tennessee. I'd like to thank Mr. Ross for covering most of the points of my presentation here. I'm joined tonight with several members here that have interest in this property. One, Mr. and Ms. David Skinner, who are the property owners. Nate Thompson, who represents Chick-fil-A Corporation out of Atlanta, one of the interested parties if this zoning comes about, would be one of the developers on this property. And also Bank Tennessee, we have Jim Rount, the CEO, and David Skinner, a development partner with the bank and helping with the development there. I'm also joined by Dr. Martin Lipinski, who has prepared a traffic study for the site as a requirement of the application, and also Jim Shumpert, who's done countless hours of work with the parties involved here to develop the concept plan that was included with the application. Relative to the rezoning, we have two parcels that have been talked about. I think talked about the reason that you would want to rezone. I think it's been clear from the comments here that the parcel number 1, which is the ag parcel, was zoned in error because it didn't have enough land associated with it to be a usable ag parcel as Mr. Ross described. The balance of the property is to make it usable for its intended use is consistent with the growth that's taken place along Poplar Avenue. If you'll go to Google Maps and do the little slide at the top and take you back in history for several years, you'll see that there were woods across there back in 2000, and then 2006 the trees disappeared and the commercial development that you see now takes place. The Exxon, as mentioned, is one of the oldest commercial developments on this side of town, been there for many years. Mr. Skinner's property, his family's owned that for over 90 years and have been out there for all that time. And in talking with Mr. Skinner and Mrs. Skinner, that's their home, that's where they plan to stay. So they are providing what would be the buffer for this commercial property as far as just a land mass. And I believe that there's enough land left over that actually could create 2 lots on Mr. Skinner's property there that would render his home site and then the balance of a property for possibly his son or another family member in the future, if that's his desire. But he has no desire to move. He built a home there in 2014. He's got a very beautiful pool house that was built a little bit later. So I think he plans to stay there. If you could bring up the concept plan, in the application for rezoning, a couple of things are required. One is a concept plan, and the other is a traffic study. We complied with both of those requirements. Complied with both of those. And like I said, this site plan did not come about overnight. This has been something that's talked about for several months, several iterations, and several meetings back and forth about how to make this a functioning, workable site for both of the tenants that plan to reside on this property that will be leased to them by Mr. Skinner. He plans to retain that property, and these will be leased, as will the bank up on Forest Hill and the new bank site. The building on Forest Hill may be another use, an office use or whatever, another use consistent with the C2 zone. That user is not yet defined. So the site plan developed over time. We've had a meeting with the neighbors. There was concern about traffic. One of the concerns was this transition area. Right now it sort of does a little quick hook 90-degree. I think when we get in front of the city engineer, they're going to recommend some transition here, and we certainly want to do that to make this a safe transition into the site. This is, I guess, one of the most detailed concept plans I've ever come up with, but it meets the requirements, I think, as far as a buffer that would go along the edge of the property. There's no additional commercial going out on Forest Hill. It's just a green space, and this is the existing drive that serves the bank now. So very little change along Forest Hill, and these are the perceived entry points. This is a full movement curb cut. This is a right in, right out. And this is a full movement curb cut that serves the bank. So I believe the property is, as Mr. Ross had earlier mentioned, in the minutes earlier, back in 1982, Mayor Dub Nance signed a certification of acceptance for the property, the triangular property that we saw as being a part of a two-lot subdivision. And then later, within a year or so, Director Jerry Cook indicated that the property should be zoned agricultural until such time as a use is defined. I think that time has come 35, 40 years later. There's been a world of change out there, and I think Mr. Skinner would appreciate getting a positive rezoning vote from the Planning Commission here as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Mr. Markham, do you want to talk about the traffic study, or is Mr. Lipinski going to talk about that?
I think I'll let Dr. Lipinski address any questions you might have. We were asked by the city engineer to go to 2 other Chick-fil-A's to do some counts. This is not just this site. We went to the Chick-fil-A on Massey. We went to the Collierville site, did on-the-ground counts. We obtained a traffic study related to the new elementary school south of Poplar Pike. He has incorporated those thoughts into that study, and have also have input from Chick-fil-A via Nate Thompson, who can speak to us about their needs. And they're not of a mind to come and build a store that doesn't function for them, and they want this to be a very successful site, as most of their sites are.
Well, of course, we're only here for the rezoning of the property, so we're not prepared to talk about any.
But I think Dr. Lipinski could address
Certainly.
any questions you might have regarding the
Good.
traffic study.
Thank you, Mr. Markham. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Bacon?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lipinski can probably, my questions are more traffic related and probably not for Mr. Markham, so. Dr. Lipinski, I don't know if you have a presentation or you just.
No, sir, I did not plan to make a presentation. I'll just answer questions.
Would you state your name and address for the record,
Martin
please?
Lipinski, 774 East Snowden Circle, Memphis, Tennessee.
Thank you, sir.
Could you explain, and clearly, as Mr. Chairman pointed out, I mean, we're not debating a particular user tonight, but it's pretty illustrative if a user that has been mentioned would locate on this site and what that kind of impact would be. Could you mention your thoughts on do you have to have the connection to Forest Hill to get traffic in and out? And then your thoughts on, because I was a little bit confused. You obviously have a right-out driveway for traffic going west, but it appears the driveway next to Exxon is a left-out. And so is there contemplated movement going eastbound from the Poplar side?
It's a right-in also. Yes, there is a significant movement of eastbound traffic into the site. And that drive next to the Exxon is a full-service driveway.
Full service, both directions? Both directions.
Yes. Now, with regard to the access on Forest Hill Irene, one of the reasons for including that was really for safety. Because of the volume of traffic that would be turning left to go back east or going north or south on Forest Hill Irene, that volume of traffic making a left turn onto Poplar Avenue would be, first of all, a very significant degree of congestion, and I think it would be a very significant safety issue too for those vehicles to attempt to make a left turn out.
But but it's contemplated that there at Forest Hill, there could be, with a user such as this, there could be a significant load at that intersection.
Well, based on the distribution of traffic on the roadway network right now, the direction where vehicles are coming from and departing to, at the most, my calculation showed approximately 70 vehicles an hour during the peak hour turning right out of that Forest Hill access point and heading east and south. A little over one a minute.
So is it contemplated, just another quick question, is it contemplated that there would be stacking in that lane? It, again, with the subject user that's proposed.
There would be an additional stacking at the signal of Forest Hill and Poplar.
No, but I mean stacking internally for this user at that driveway. Is that a stacking location as well?
Yeah, there will be room there, enough room for vehicles to be stacked who are turning left and right onto Forest Hill Irene.
So in the count, and I'm sorry to hammer this because it's just, this particular user generates a lot of passion both ways. But in, I guess, the counts that have been contemplated relative to total stacking, it includes cars that are not just on that driveway. It includes cars that would be in the lane going out towards the bank and out towards Forest Hill, correct? Or is it just in that little center stacking lane?
Yes, well, each individual access point was analyzed, and in the analysis is a calculation as to the 95% probability of what the queue length would be for each one of the movements.
Okay.
As a follow-up, let me ask Mr. Gwaltney, who's our traffic engineer. You've seen this study. Do you have any questions or issues?
Yes, to answer your question, yes, the traffic analysis has been reviewed. Yes, there are still some questions to be answered. We're working back and forth with Dr. Lipinski, as well as our traffic consultant, Kimley Horn, to come up with whether the site plan as shown is the best, or if other alternatives are available. We talked about the possibility of that access not being available to Forest Hill Irene. If that is the case, what repercussions would there be? And quite honestly, with a development being proposed as we're reviewing now, that access to Forest Hill Irene is critical. Without it, one of the other possibilities would be a signal at the west to the driveway of the property. Again, that's gonna open up a chain of events where we're bringing other entities into the approval process, such as TDOT, and look at the fact of the signal is even warranted with the amount of traffic that's being generated from this site. And so, long story short is, it's a fluid study that is continuing, and yes, additional information is needed for the site plan.
For the site plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, if I might add, we had a meeting last week with Mr. Gwatney and Mr. Collins, and they had some excellent suggestions. They questioned some of the things in the report, which I am modifying, and they also asked me to look at a couple of other issues, which I've started to look at, and that was just last Thursday, so I'm in the process of kind of revising this and addressing all their comments and suggestions into the report. I honestly don't believe it will make a significant difference as to my findings, but I do need to clarify some things, and I also need to address some mitigation measures that I might not have included in the initial report. As to the point that Mr. Gwatney mentioned about the potential traffic signal at the westernmost access to the site, it's one of those things that sounds good, but can you develop a site plan that can work? And that's where I have some issues, that it appears to be, in talking to the parties that are concerned with the development, that it would be very, very difficult to develop a workable site plan that would provide adequate circulation and storage and parking for all land uses within that site if that one major entrance were shifted to the far west.
Commissioners?
One more question. Dr. Lipinski.
Yes, sir.
I thought I heard Mr. Markham indicate that your traffic study did incorporate the anticipated traffic and completion of the new elementary school down on Forest Hill, Irene Road. Is that
That
correct?
point was raised at the public meeting we had. After our meeting last Thursday, I made contact with the schools, the school district, and I received a map of the attendance area for the new school, and actually most of the attendance area is south of Poplar. I believe they only projected like 6 students in the area along Forest Hill, north of Poplar. That's based on the school map that I received.
Commissioners, other questions?
I had a question just because it was brought up about
Commissioner
traffic
Clark.
light up there. And I was looking at that, how that area to the south allows access. They kind of line up on your site plan here. And Mr. Gwatney brought up the point of a traffic light. If a traffic light was to be put there, I know that on Chevrolet we ran into some issues of the lights being too close to Poplar and Kirby. Would that fall within the distance required between the 2 traffic lights? If one was to be put there, would that require a warrant?
The distance from Forest Hill to this potential site is longer than from Kirby to Trevere. So this is, as far as distance goes, this is a better situation than at Trevere.
So it would not require a warrant to put a traffic light there?
Oh, yeah. They all require a warrant analysis.
Okay.
And yes, a warrant analysis would be needed.
But I think what you're saying, that with the signal being warranted, I mean, as far as distance goes, it's warrant, we're talking warrants, we're talking traffic volumes, not distance.
Right. Okay.
Commissioner Marsh.
Just want to be clear, though, in our proceedings here and what we're being asked to consider, we are not being asked to approve particular uses, including any particular user on this site. All we're being presented with is a request for a change in zoning to provide for the general commercial or C2 zoning.
Let me clarify that, not only for you, but for the rest of the audience, that we are here tonight to only consider rezoning of this property that's been identified. We are not here to discuss what goes on the property if it is rezoned, okay? That would be a separate meeting at a later date where they would have to come back and do a site plan for us, and we would get into more of the traffic and drainage and some of these other issues. This is strictly rezoning. Should this property be rezoned or not? Other questions? Alderman?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, could you, Dr. Lipinski, could you talk a little bit about that, I guess I'll call it, is it a deceleration lane or left turn lane? You would be turning actually right turn off of Forest Hill Irene. How many lanes do we have right there at that intersection with the subdivision there? And I guess my concern is you've got people that are coming down Forest Hill Irene, and if it's still 2 lanes there, because we want obviously to have room for those people to get out of the way for others.
Right. I think it would, it would take an analysis. There's probably kind of too much pavement there in the transition. I think we'd have to take a look at how we can logically, transition from the intersection where the access is to the intersection of Forest Hill and Irene to probably allow 2 through lanes, 1 right turn lane, and a left turn lane.
Other questions?
I have a question, Mr.
Commissioners.
Chairman, of our city engineer, traffic engineer, Mr. Quatney. From that point of where the street is widening on Forest Hill Ring going northbound, what is my understanding, anticipation of that is that that's going to be widened sometime in the near future. How does that impact this particular property here?
If you're referring to the city's future widening for Forest Hill.
Yes.
Up to Wolf River, it involves widening to include a center turn lane, not a full-blown median divided 4 lane similar to the cross-section between Poplar Pike and Winchester.
So there would be a center turn lane for left and right turns off of the Forest Hill Arena. At that point, would you have that situation where there would be a center lane that people could get into that to make turns into a development of this type? Would that be something that would be warranted?
Into a development of this type?
Coming up from the south there, to keep from impeding traffic going to the north, are you going to have a center lane? Would you have a center lane?
At the intersections, all the way to Wolf River.
And then also that lane, it would be widened to the point where you wouldn't have that drastic 90-degree cutoff at that point, correct?
Right, and I believe Mr. Markham mentioned that earlier too, is that, yes, we've already identified that where the existing driveway is, where it's stubbed out, blocked out, if you will, right now, but there will be a transition if this site plan or something similar were to move forward.
That it would be incorporated into the new design that's coming forward sometime in the near future.
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioners, other questions?
Yeah,
Alderman?
Just to follow up on it, so that is not shown in this plan, and I know we're getting really into the weeds here, but that's not shown in this plan, is that correct?
No, that is correct.
Okay.
It's not detailed yet.
And then also, Mr. Gwaltney, I wasn't aware of that. What is there a time frame for that widening, or is it in the city plans at any time, or?
We have requested federal funding for it. We should know by May of this year whether we're successful in receiving that federal funds. Let's say we are. I mean, best case scenario, it would be under construction within about 2.5 to 3 years.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just one follow-up question. So obviously rezoning this to C2, it has significant traffic implications, and I don't know, Mr. Gwaltney, if you're ready to speak to it or not, but you said there are issues that are fluid.
Well, I'm not sure if that was the correct term, but I mean, yes, we have had questions. They are being addressed I mean, I don't think there's anything that I personally would say, no, do not approve the rezoning at this point.
So there's nothing from your standpoint as the city engineer with traffic-related issues relative to whatever this user may end up being, but in a C2 context. Clearly, there are different loads for different users, but
correct.
But your review, your overall general review is that a C2 use can be handled, I guess, with the ingress-egress point on Forest Hill. You'd have to have that. You'd have to have that.
Yes.
Commissioners, if we have no other questions, thank you, Mr. Lipinski. I'm going to ask if there's anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this project, if they would come forward. Yes, sir. Please come forward, state your name and address. Remember, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Greg Sherrill. I've been a Germantown resident for 28 years. I live at 2257 Lansingwood Drive, Germantown 38139. Ladies and gentlemen, I work with state and local officials like yourself every day across multiple states. And a common theme that I always hear when I'm talking to these ladies and gentlemen are that public sector budgets are stressed. I don't see any reason to believe that Germantown's not facing the same stress, and I don't see any short-term fix for it. So, yes, I am for this zoning for these 3 reasons. One, I know we're not here to talk about users, but I frequent Chick-fil-A a lot, my family and I, and if we could get another restaurant, I think in the city, it would obviously be a positive effect on my overall experience with traffic and with wait times, et cetera. Number 2, I believe Mr. Skinner has made a good faith attempt to minimize any negative impact to his neighbors, and for that matter, even to himself, given the location of his own residence. But most importantly, I want to see more businesses like Chick-fil-A come to the city of Germantown, find a home in our community to help offset any future rise in property taxes. Or for God forbid, any compromise to our current level of funding for public safety. And with regard to property taxes, I believe the majority of the citizens of Germantown would have my same point of view.
Thank you, Mr. Sherrill. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor of this project? Yes, sir. Please come forward.
William Glass, 9053 Stonewalk Place. I own commercial property, corporate gardens across the street to the south. And I'd just like to echo, I don't know what the ultimate use is, but I'd like to see the city of Germantown get proactive on increasing revenue, because my property taxes on my commercial property have continued to rise, and anything that we could do to offset that, I would welcome. We offer a lot of services in this town, and that costs a lot of money. And at some point, it looks like to me that we need to be proactive on getting sales tax revenue to offset it for all the property owners.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else? Yes, sir.
Joe Garaffa, 9440 Forestwood Road, Germantown. I'm in favor. This should be commercial. It's obviously a commercial area. The 4 corners are commercial, and the revenue derived from this commercial with little services needed by the city will be welcome. As a second, and you don't have to answer this, but it's going to be interesting to see what you do with the rest of Poplar on that south side, the north side between Germantown and Houston and Forest Hill Irene. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with that, because I don't see anyone building residential homes along that corridor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
My name is Mike McGee. I live at 8605 Woodlane Drive. And not on? Thank you. I could have read that, couldn't I? Yeah. Mike McGee, I live at 8605 Wood Lane Drive, and I got to be honest with you, I didn't come here tonight to speak, but after listening to all these individuals talk, and then, Mr. Chairman, thank you for kind of redirecting everybody back on why we're here this evening. I would say it's a win-win, but to me, just as a person listening to all this, it sounds like a win-win-win because first and foremost, after listening to the staff's presentation, who've done great due diligence on the what's trying to occur here this evening, this particular rezoning is 100% in alignment of what this leadership of Germantown has set out for this particular area, to try to grow this and try to move forward with one of 5 different pods, this being one of those. And to have an individual like Mr. Skinner who is willing to take a piece of property and shift it that way, you can laugh if you want to, but
ladies and gentlemen,
here's the biggest thing. There is nobody, just from my observation of looking what's up there on the screen, that would be more impacted by this, if there was an impact as a residential individual of this community, than Mr. Skinner.
Ladies and gentlemen, please.
I'm saying everybody has their opinion of whatnot, but just like the former gentleman who just set up here, all of the adjacent properties of that are zoned in accordance to the commercial piece of property. And that piece right there would, again, go a long way in helping the leadership of Germantown achieve their achievement or their goals of pushing forward with this piece of property over here. You can tell I'm not a public speaker over here, but I would highly encourage y'all all to move back to taking that piece of property that at once was set aside to say we need to do something with this down the road, but not just now. I think this is the time to do that, and I would appreciate y'all's consideration in moving forward with that as well.
Thank you, Mr. McGee. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this project? If not, do we have anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this project? I would like to encourage you that if you have a chief spokesman, it looks like we may have one coming up here, that if he can cover most of the bases, then we won't have to have everyone speak. Yes, sir.
Does that mean I get more than 3 minutes, Mr. Chairman? Because I'll need it.
Well, we may give you a little latitude there, okay?
Well, I'll need some latitude. There's been a lot said. My name is David Wade. My office is at 6410 Poplar Avenue. I'm an attorney, and I represent a bunch of the neighbors who are here tonight to have their voice heard as well. Cameron, I don't know how to do this, but can I get the node put up, please? And can I borrow your pointer? It's all together. Great. Here you go. Okay. I've been doing this, representing neighbors, for going on probably 40 years now. And I have to say, having sat through this session, I have never seen a situation where there is so much difficulty with a proposed project. And I wonder why. I mean, we can say that this doesn't have anything to do with Chick-fil-A. That's absolutely what it has to do with Chick-fil-A. And this is the first step. So this is an important step, because when you improve C2 zoning, you approve everything that can go into a C2 zone. Now, I do want to have a little difference of opinion with Mr. Ross. If I know how to use this gadget here, I'll try. I want to take a close look at this node. You'll notice that on the north side of Poplar, there's no commercial except for that spot right there. Now, in your presentation, you were heard that that was originally ag, and before that, it was switched from a commercial piece and moved down to that corner. People have been trying to figure out what folks were thinking back in 1982. Well, I think I know what they were thinking back in 1982. They were being pretty good land planners. They moved the commercial to that corner. It's no longer located up in here anywhere. And that piece of commercial right there, as far as I know, is the only piece of commercial north of Poplar between Exeter and Johnson Road, maybe more. I've heard it said that there isn't any C2 next to residential. I've heard some comments that there may be a spot or two where that's the case. But by and large, there's no C2 or next to residential. Now, why is that? You know, I've been in this business for a long time, and I know you have too. There is one logical thing to do with this piece of property. It's not to talk about how to shoehorn a commercial piece for a project that doesn't really work there. The thing you do for these neighbors is you do what's across the street, across Forest Hill, Irene. That's all office or all office campus. In my experience, and I'm sure in yours, when you go to neighbors, you say to them, look, you can't keep development out, but you step down to residential. And going to C2 here is not a step down to residential. There's another thing about this node that I want you to notice. According to the staff's presentation, every bit of this could be rezoned because it's in the 5th District, Poplar Avenue East District. Okay. What do you do to protect these people up here that abut it to the north? You step down to residential. You don't step up. Now, with all due respect, this property is, excuse me. Help. Look, okay. This property is perfectly usable. It will fit within your plans, the 2030 plan. It'll fit within the 2012 plan. And the important thing is I, this weekend, visited your fair community. I'm from Memphis, don't condemn me for that. But as I drove down Poplar, there was no commercial north of Poplar till you get over to Germantown Road. Now there is a legend. I don't know whether it's true or not, but I've heard it for many years. The legend is that there was not intended to be commercial development north of Poplar. Now, that legend may not be true, but you drive down Poplar and you'll see there may be a basis for it. So, if this development, which you say we're not supposed to condition or consider, but it's obviously what's driving this. You've got Chick-fil-A here. If you read the staff report mentions time and again what you have to do pre-zoning. For instance, what are you going to do about the drive out to Forest Hill, Irene that you've talked so much about tonight? It's a real problem. You know, I got people here, I didn't know you had those signs on, but these people live there. I'm here to represent the folks in Grove Forest Cove, Bellflower Cove, Forest Hill Lane, Hughes Creek Cove, some folks on Forest Hill Irene Cove. They live there. They drive down those roads every day. You know, I happen to have a case, I'll just give you an example, over on Poplar Avenue where there was an effort to put in a Sonic. There were no restaurants like that anywhere along the line. And the city council, in its wisdom, decided against it because of the incursion into the neighborhood. You know, it's not all going to turn right to go back out to Poplar again. It's going to turn left to go back up into the neighborhood where these folks live. And these folks are going to be coming down Forest Hill Irene. Now, you may say there's only one car a minute, but they're the ones that have to deal with it and the ones who are turning left. Okay, you don't want me to consider Chick-fil-A, but that's what's driving this application, folks, and this is the first step. Without that, this application would not be here. So I'd like to just discuss a few things. First, I don't know that I need to ask you this, but would all the folks who are opposed to the application stand up? All right. These are real people who could spend their 3 minutes each talking to you. But for some ungodly reason, they've asked me to speak for them, so I'm glad to do it. Because I have to say, thank you folks, in all my years in this business, this is the most difficult effort to try to shoehorn something into a piece of property where it really doesn't fit, where, for planning purposes for this city and for these people, there is a perfect solution. Office is the perfect way to step it down for these folks. Now, let me just finish up with a couple of ideas. You know, what can you do in this zone besides a Chick-fil-A? The fact is, you can put a bunch of things in this zone. Now, when I went to the executive committee meeting, you talked about adult businesses. It's permitted. Hospitals are permitted. Shoe repair places are permitted. What'd you say? A cheesecake factory is permitted? That is a C2 zone. Now, for people who are in residences, what's the best use to have next to you? An office that closes at 5 in the afternoon, not some place that's open until 11 o'clock at night, or 12, or whatever it is. An office that's not open on the weekends. Admittedly, Chick-fil-A is not open on Sunday, but it is open on Saturday. So all of that area north of Poplar, just take a look at it. It's developing as residential. There's new subdivisions going in, new homes being built up there. What is to say that this piece of property needs a change? If there's been a change, it's more intensely residential. Now, you do have all this stuff south of Poplar, okay? That's where it belongs. There's been no change in circumstances north of Poplar that would warrant this. So, just looking at all the difficult issues you've heard about tonight, trying to shoehorn something in that doesn't go in a very difficult piece of property. If it were the only thing that could be done, okay, but it's not. And I would submit for these folks that if you take a look at the legal criteria, which is you have to show a change in condition, change in property, change in population, that warrants the change in zoning. And I suggest to you that there is nothing north of Poplar that warrants this change in zoning. If anything, these residential folks have a right to say to you, do what good planners do. Have a step down in use when you're bordering residential. That's good, solid planning. So you've got a petition in front of you with 85 signatures, 86, I think, maybe. You've got 21 letters from folks. These people are here and could talk, but I'm going to ask them just to, if they're okay with what I've said, then we're going to submit it to you. But
thank you, Mr. Wade. We appreciate your comments.
yes, sir.
Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this? Please come forward and state your name, address.
Good evening. My name is Natalie Malone. My address is 4866 Delbridge Court East in Olive Branch, Mississippi. But I'm also a property owner at 9113 Bellflower Cove in Germantown, Tennessee, where my husband and I are building our new home. I'm a member of the Province Place Homeowners Association, and as such, I'm also here on behalf of myself and my neighbors who live along Bellflower Cove in Province Place. The requested change to this zoning is unprecedented. It undermines the predictability relied upon by homeowners when making an investment to purchase or build a nice home in this area, and these are nice homes in this area. This change is unprecedented because there's a lack of other C2 zone property abutting residential zone property in Germantown as a whole. It was purposeful that there is minimal C2 zone property on the north side of Poplar, with the exception of grandfathered-in property, the status of which could not be taken away despite the intention that property north of Poplar be residential. There's a vast difference of uses permitted when going from agricultural to C2. Agricultural is restricted use. C2 is the most expansive, and a rationale for changing that is not supported tonight. The presence of a commercial enterprise, whatever the specific use eventually becomes, in this proposed location will be destructive to the quality of life and the neighborhoods and the nearby residences. Once you change this, it will be changed forever, and you cannot undo this. It's important that development and growth proceed in a cautious manner to protect the neighborhoods and the family-friendly atmosphere in those areas north of Poplar. This area has a distinctive charm, and that's appreciated by the residents in this area. Everyone in this area is not necessarily have young children. I have a 3.5-year-old and a 5.5-year-old. We didn't come here to live next to a commercial zone. Lastly, we are requesting that you deny the requested zoning change. In the event that this zoning change is approved, at a minimum, it is imperative that no access be granted to this area off of Forest Hill. Allowing access off of Forest Hill.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Allowing access off of Forest Hill would create a dangerous, life-threatening situation that every homeowner along Belle Fleur who will face the entrance to the proposed user will have to encounter every single time we enter or exit our neighborhood. I'm confident that it's not a question of if a deadly accident will occur, but when. In order to help safeguard that access will not be permitted off Forest Hill, there are options such as installing a curb along the eastern border of the property that is the subject of this proposed rezoning that is adjacent to the backside of the existing Bank Tennessee. Additionally, the proper owner could be required to enter into an agreement with the City Planning Commission and record a deed restriction restricting any such use of ingress or egress from the proposed site of the zoning change onto or off of Forest Hill. It is imperative that no access be granted to this property off of Forest Hill for the safety of my family and the other families who live along Forest Hill. There is yet to be a showing that this change is necessary or warranted by a change in circumstances of the land north of Poplar. It will be detrimental to our neighborhoods and the families who live there. We request that the zoning change be denied.
Thank you, ma'am. Well presented. Any other? Yes, sir, if you'll come forward.
Okay, my wife is all nervous about me talking, so don't look at her, okay? My name is Dr. John Lynn. I've been living at, is there a pointer here? The what? Okay. I live at 9001 Grove Forest Cove. We moved there in 1999. Our property is right about there. Isn't that right? Yeah. Okay. My property is right about there. When my wife and I bought that property for about approximately $500,000, and back in 1999, we bought it through the builder, Mr. Yulehorn, who at the time he sold it to us, we were concerned about what's going to go on with this property right here and over here. He assured to us that Germantown was a bedroom community, and he was going to do everything in his power as an alderman to keep it that way. And that, what was that rumor? The legend of keeping everything north of there as residential certainly was sold to me. I believed him. I put good faith in it. I put a lot of money into my house. It's worth probably well over $1 million now. Obviously, first of all, I have 3 points. The financial impact would be horrific to me as a neighbor, just that alone. I understand the concerns about safety and economics and everything like that, but as a neighbor, and I am a neighbor, okay, and the rest of my neighbors here and around here, we would suffer a financial detriment, no question about it, for this proposal, first of all. That's personal, right? That's selfish, I admit it, okay? My second point is, how are we as Germantown people, really going to treat our citizens? Are we going to want to promote the greater good of the community? Are we going to want to promote the greater good of the community at the expense of others? Or are we going to want to promote the greater good of the community, both to benefit the greater good of the community and the immediate surrounding neighbors? Both can be done. This proposal would not do that. That would do great harm to the immediate surrounding neighbors, okay? This could be done, or something similar to this could be done in such a way as was brought out by our representative over here, that would be fair and equitable by stepping it down. But to put something such as a Chick-fil-A immediately adjacent to our residential neighborhood, come on, guys. Really? Would you want that for you? Would anybody want that in their property? Something like a commercial going up right next to your house that you spent all your life investing in and, you know, spent your life working on? Yeah, we take it personally. That's point number, I guess, 2. Point number 3 was topographical maps are garbage. You guys need to go out there and look at what this property really looks like and the impacts before you make any kind of decision. And see, I've lived there. I lived there where there weren't houses here, and I was just one of 2 houses there. The growth that I have seen has not been commercial, Mr. Ross. The growth has been residential, okay? And this property here, if anything, would adversely impact the residential rather than enhance it. So it seemed to me that one of the qualifications where we were going to make a change because the surrounding area demands it, if anything, the surrounding area has grown in its residential. And these estates are very nice estates. Okay? So I guess that's what? Point number 3, honey? And she says, I'm done. So there's my passion speech to you all. I thank you for your patience.
Dr. Lynn, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Yes, ma'am.
I sent this in a letter to Sheila, I believe, and some others. I'll skip over a lot of it because a lot of it was said. But
ma'am, if you'd give
oh,
me
excuse me. I'm Kathy Lynn. I live at 9001 Grove Forest Cove, wife to the doctor here. So, and I would just say.
I never could get the last word.
No. Okay. So here we go. The proposed, and this is about Chick-fil-A, because the proposed Chick-fil-A and relocated bank would most certainly be the beginning of the end of the bedroom community concept that has so long been the pride of Germantown residents. We love our town for its small town appeal. It's quiet, it's safe, uncrowded, financially sound, and ease of traffic. That'll end. Each of these positive qualities would be drastically and negatively affected by the proposed zoning changes and the arrival of the highest volume fast food restaurant in the country. And I love Chick-fil-A, absolutely love it. Our quietness, keeping commercial and office businesses in downtown Germantown and at designated intersections on the south side of Poplar, well removed from residential, has preserved the quiet, peaceful community that we have always cherished. A Chick-fil-A 200 feet from my neighbor's backyard wouldn't be an unprecedented intrusion by Germantown standards and Chick-fil-A standards. Chick-fil-A does not locate themselves right on top of residential. They just don't do it. Nowhere else in Germantown, Collierville, or the disastrous Cordova is there any fast food establishment 200 feet from someone's backyard. The noise of traffic, speakers, bright lights of the bustling fast food business, the smells of chicken cooking 18 hours a day, all combine to crush the tranquility that we could expect to enjoy in our homes. The traffic situation, and I looked it up online, Chick-fil-A has broken the mold when it comes to high-volume fast food restaurants. As they struggle to keep ahead of their success and demand, they have had to re-engineer their whole approach time and again. They are one business that continues to overperform. Hence the adage, if you build it, they will come. There are many examples here and around the country of Chick-fil-A overperforming and outperforming all expectations. The sheer volume of traffic it will attract is mind-boggling. Recent studies that I found online estimate that a single Chick-fil-A generates between 400 and 500,000 vehicle visits per year. That averages to over 1,450 vehicles per day. And I don't think that was considered in the traffic report. The proposal to access the store from Forest Hill Irene Road puts hundreds more vehicles daily on a residential road that cannot handle it. Current residents will experience long delays to get out of their coves and neighborhoods. Around the country, there have never been a queue line long enough to handle Chick-fil-A's traffic without great negative impact on the bordering streets. Creative solutions to remedy this have included full-time traffic police, additional stoplights, specific for that Chick-fil-A, employees outside taking orders from the queue line, etc. Add to this always underestimated volume, the opening of the new grade school in the fall of 2019, and you have a complete traffic disaster in the making.
30 seconds, please, ma'am.
Okay. Let me say, financially, we are opposed to the highly respected and we are not opposed to highly respected and successful businesses such as Chick-fil-A finding a suitable, less intrusive location in existing C2 zones in Germantown. We applaud capitalism when it is mutually beneficial to all parties. The present proposal benefits one person, David Skinner, and this single benefit is at the expense of hundreds of his neighbors. And I had a question. Has there been a study about the firehouse that's on Forest Hill, and every Chick-fil-A creates a right-hand lane traffic jam? A fire truck coming to turn, which they do many times a day, especially to get down to the, at Kirby, the garden, not the garden, no, the other way, the retirement home, the great big one there. Okay, if they have to turn right and we're supposed to, as motorists, go to the right, but that lane is already being blocked by Chick-fil-A waiting to turn right from westbound traffic from Collierville. That is already being blocked. Is that an issue? Has anybody studied that? Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Lynn. Appreciate it. Yes, sir, if you'll come forward.
All right, good evening. Just 1.5 minutes. My name is Michael Robietto. I'm a relatively new resident. I live on Forest Hill Lane, 9245 Forest Hill Lane, 38139. And again, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak. My wife Pamela and I are relatively new residents. We moved from Irvine, California. And one of the reasons we chose Germantown is actually, Germantown actually reminded us of Irvine, California. You know, the emphasis on schools, the strong police force, safety, what we thought was solid master planning, and that really attracted us to Germantown. In regard to the issue at hand, in Irvine we had 3 Chick-fil-A's. They were all located in large commercial areas, really, large malls or shopping centers. There was nothing remotely close to a residential neighborhood. And by now, I'm sure you've heard a lot of the reasons why we were, clearly indicate our opposition to the proposed rezoning, of the Skinner property. And I do believe that all of these reasons are very sensible, and legitimate. When we heard the presentation at Whole Foods, it was very clear to us that there was little regard for the effect on the local community, and rather the main emphasis was on maximizing profits. And that was very disturbing to me to hear that. So ultimately, I believe this is a decision about Germantown values. And if I can ask you all just to put yourself in our shoes, how you would like to have a high-volume fast food establishment with all the collateral issues that come along with that, just literally steps from your homes. So as members of the Planning Commission, you all have a duty to responsible city planning. And we are asking you to exercise this and in good faith and exercise, careful due diligence. So we're asking you to not consider this proposal for rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I might add, welcome to Germantown from Irvine. Glad to have you. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you. My name is Andy Davidoff. I live on 9309 Forest Hill Lane, and I'd like to make my comments a little bit different, and I'd accept Mr. Marsh's suggestion that we focus on the simple question of rezoning. And so my comment or question relates to need. Why does Germantown need this? So what Mr. Ross neglected to say, but those of us who live in the area see very clearly every day, is in this area of Forest Hill, Irene, Poplar extending back to Poplar Pike, I would say that maybe a third to half of the office space, business potential space, restaurants are either unused, for sale, in disrepair, neglected. So the question is, why do we need to make more commercial space when we're not even using well the space that's already been zoned? Why tear down the things that we think are beautiful about Germantown, the reason that we came here, just to put in more commercial space when the space that's already been zoned for isn't being used? And, in hearing some of the comments this evening, to right an old mistake, that just doesn't resonate with me, and I'm worried about Germantown going down the slippery slope here of tearing down trees and woods and things that we love here just for commercial advancement, when I think the message that I'd like to portray here is that there has been an economic development plan. With all due respect, I'm not so sure that it's working, as judged by all the empty storefronts and office space and so on. I think before we agree to changing the zoning, let's relook at this economic development plan and see, what aspects of it have gone wrong, and reconsider that before doing this. There's really, there's no return from this. I've never seen an example where a failed commercial endeavor was torn down to replant trees. That's not going to happen, and we don't want to be in that circumstance. So I think let's reconsider what's already been done before moving ahead with more. This isn't about serving Mr. Skinner or Chick-fil-A. This is about serving the people of Germantown, and we need to keep that in the forefront of our mind, or you need to keep that in the forefront of your mind as you think about this this important decision. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in opposition to this project? If not, I think we have one more. Sorry. No problem. Come on up. Sound like, let's make a deal. Come on up. Come on down.
Hello, gentlemen. My name is Mary Bollinger, and I live at 9144 Forest Hill Lane. I have been in Germantown since 1984. I have been in this building many a times. And the myth about, I was always told that north of Poplar will always be residential and south of Poplar will always be commercial. I don't want to see Germantown change, but I live one house off of Forest Hill, Irene. Last week it took me 9 minutes to get out on the street, to turn left. None of that other traffic has shown up yet. And I was one of the people who asked about the traffic report, because traffic is my concern. And I do see accidents happening there all the time. And unless those streets are widened, first I thought Chick-fil-A's coming, yummy, yummy. But then when you thought about Pandora's box and what it's going to open, I had to change my mind. And I can't see anything coming on to Forest Hill, Irene. It just won't work. It will make things worse. The street is not suitable for it. The traffic is not suitable for it. And I've lived there for now, I lived in my first house 11 years over in Gentry. So I've lived there 20-something years, and I drive that every day. So every day I hit that traffic. So that's why I decided to speak, because I'm the person that's hitting that traffic every day. And when you think about Chick-fil-A coming and a new bank coming and another restaurant we've heard is proposed for, what is it, Wimpy Burgers or something in front of the UPS building, it's more traffic. And when they did their first traffic study, they did not consider the new school. So I just can't imagine that new school, those new students, also other people are going to be housed in that area. It's just traffic, 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 gentlemen. And that's it.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate your comments. Yes, sir.
I will keep it brief. I didn't intend to speak, but there's I guess 2 or 3 things that as you listen, and even though I'm a neighbor and even though a lot of the points that have been made resonate with me, I also like to think that I'm fair-minded and objective and kind of put myself in your shoes because I've been involved in similar situations. There's 2 or 3 things that I think most people in the room would agree with. One of which being that this development would without...
I need your name and address, please.
I'm sorry. Gordon Summerfield, 2895 Hughes Creek Cove, 38139.
Thank you.
So apologize for that. There are 2 or 3 things that I think everybody in the room would primarily agree with. Number one, this development will certainly benefit Mr. Skinner, and I do not begrudge him for that at all, although it is a bit ironic to me personally because we have mutual friends, and I've only, outside of introducing myself on the way in, I've only spoken to Mr. Skinner one time, and that was when he called to enlist my help to fight the widening of Forest Hill Irene to 4 lanes as part of the widening project. He was concerned about it. He was concerned about it from his property value. He was concerned about it, I recollect, from a safety factor. So I think that he probably can appreciate the way most of the people in the room feel. Number 2, I think we can all agree we love Chick-fil-A. I'm quite the customer, and would love to have them nearby. And the last thing I would say is I appreciate the challenges that you ladies and gentlemen have in terms of balancing growing our revenue, keeping our taxes down, balancing with balancing what our city is. And the other thing I think we'd agree with is we love our city. With that said, I can say that there are a couple of things about this that don't ring very true to me. Number one, I think we're being totally naive if we don't recognize that there will be negative effects to property values. We know traffic is going to go up if it is C2. If it is a development that requires an entrance and exit on Forest Hill Irene, traffic is, then to me, it's the wrong development. I'm not opposed to development. My property adjoins to the property that is zoned office campus. If I had my way, it would remain woods forever, but I'm a realist. And so the suggestion earlier by, I believe, Mr. Wade, that the same use be considered for this, I think would be more logical. But I think that in being fair and looking at this, you've got to be realistic enough to know that this is a nightmare if this happens. I live off of Forest Hill Lane. There will be people cutting through my neighborhood to get to Forest Hill to go to this restaurant in this commercial district. So it doesn't just affect the people right behind it, it affects everyone around it. And I'll conclude by saying I find it a little ironic that the traffic planner's suggestion that, oh, well, we just widen the road there to benefit Mr. Skinner's development is exactly what Mr. Skinner told me he didn't want before it benefited. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in opposition? Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Sherry Jones. I live at 9137 Forest Hill Lane, and I am president of the Homeowners Association. I've lived on that street. We built our house 24 years ago, and prior to building our house, prior to buying the lot, we went to Mr. Cook and looked at a spot on the map where our lot would be, and the property in back of us was zoned estate and 4 acres, and he said at that time it could not be divided any smaller. And that's why these stickers, why we have them printed, and why our neighborhood has fought over and over again for different rezoning at different times. I say that to emphasize that the city did consider what we said at that time, and it was rezoned. We did not have to have high-density housing, but we did end up with a wonderful neighborhood, Belfour Clove behind us. And then at another time, we used the same stickers to resist change of zoning as you exit Target, the area that backs up to Hughes Creek Cove, which is now Office Campus. Again, that would be a step down to the residential area. And each of these decisions has emphasized the city's plans to keep the area north of Poplar residential or Office Campus to save our property values and to handle traffic areas in the city. We're opposed to the area also because of personal safety for ourselves and for all those using our street. The amount of traffic increase on Poplar and Forest Hill Irene since the opening of Wolf River, it's increased much more than was planned, I'm sure, because I think the city thought Wolf River would take a lot of the traffic away from that area and take it farther out, but instead many of them already cut down Forest Hill Irene. We anticipate another increase in traffic with the opening of the new school. It will not only be elementary students, but that school will be home for the administrative offices for all of the area schools, all of the Germantown schools. And I believe that will be about 400 people that will also come to the other side of Poplar. The number of teenage drivers cutting down our street now, the number of teenage drivers we anticipate coming down Forest Hill Irene, tired or with their phones or with their parents driving them to get chicken, is a perfect setup for tragic accidents. Drivers trying to turn left on Forest Hill Lane combined with more traffic leaving Chick-fil-A and going down Forest Hill Lane is a recipe for disaster. If you look up Chick-fil-A on YouTube, you can witness some of the nightmares of traffic in other cities that have been created.
30 seconds.
Okay, changing zoning would be catastrophic to the safety and welfare of this area of Germantown. We are a residential town based on taking care of its residents. We don't oppose Chick-fil-A, we just encourage you to find a better location for it in a place already zoned C2. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Jones. Is there anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here. My name is Joni Herron. I live at 9010 Grove Forest Cove. I, too, am totally against this property being zoned commercial. for several reasons. My thoughts at this point right now are down the road. What is to prevent Mr. Skinner from saying the property to the south of his home? Why not come out and say, well, if that other property has already been zoned commercial, why don't I have this one zoned commercial as well? Eventually, it just goes back and back and back, and we're right smack up against zonal commercial property. I think this is wrong. We bought our home with our hard-earned money. We are retired, and we can't afford not to move monetarily or physically because we're in our 70s, and it's we're in the fourth quarter.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. But anyway, I just think this is totally, totally wrong. End of story.
Ms. Herron, thank you.
Thank you.
I know the hour is getting late, but is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
David Skinner.
No,
Can
sir.
I clarify their attorney's misstatement?
No, sir.
Okay, fair enough.
No, sir.
All right.
Is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to speak in opposition to this project? If not, commissioners, do you have any questions? Alderman? Questions? Questions? Do we have a report?
Mr. Chairman, the Zoning and Annexation Subcommittee met on January 16th, 2019, and recommended that the application be placed on the next Planning Commission agenda for action, subject to the subcommittee discussion, comments in the staff report, and the plans and documents filed with the application. Oops. The proposed motion this evening is to approve the rezoning from RE, Residential Estate, and AG Agriculture to C2 General Commercial of 3.69 acres of property located at the northwest quadrant of Poplar Avenue and Forest Hill Irene Road. I don't think that's correct. It says known as the Reeve Schaefer property, but that's not. Okay, yep, sorry. Subject to the Commission's discussion, staff comments in the staff report, and the plans and documents filed with the application.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Saunders seconded. Please call the roll.
Ms. Hicks. Thank you all for being here. You've really stayed on point. You've made great points both sides. It's been helpful to me to hear everything you've had to say, so thank you all for your comments and for being here with us tonight. I think this rezoning has been simmering for a long time, simmering for lack of a better word. In '82, there were the comments, remainder of this property to be left agricultural until such time as a request to rezone is made. The current AG is not really a viable zoning based on its size. In 2012, we had the long-range strategic economic development plan that also identified this was a property that could potentially be rezoned. 2030, they also said pretty much the same thing. With these rezonings, we do see big buffers. I'm a fan of those. But there has been a significant change in the neighborhood. There's development trends that warrant the change, and I vote yes. Mr. Bacon.
Mr. Chairman, I'm voting no. I'd like to compliment.
Ladies and gentlemen, please.
Thank you for attending. Thank you for all the speakers. We had quite a few speakers. This process works really well when we have a lot of public participation. I believe the zoning change application is too abrupt. I think good planning practice is to use step zoning. I think in this instance to go from low density, low impact, low use to high impact, high use inside of 200 feet is just too close. I would argue that there's really not a development trend on the north side of Poplar. I think that's been made, a lot of comments were made relative to that, but it's pretty clear Most of the development, if not all of the development, has been residential on the north side of Poplar. I realize we're not debating users tonight. I have a significant concern if this particular user were to be successful and to locate on this property with the traffic impact. I think the traffic impact on Forest Hill could be ferocious at that driveway. It's a popular user, popular restaurant. We all love them, may or may not be them, but I think that they as an entity need to figure out their own site development issues. And lastly, I'd just like to say I think a zoning change and a use change like this could set a precedent on the north side of Poplar that we're not going to be ready for. So I'm voting no.
Mr. Saunders.
Probably one of those that's been so old can remember that statement about development to the north of Poplar. In fact, I may have been a little bit involved in one that went to OC out there, one of my clients. I thoroughly believe that step-down zoning is the appropriate way to go throughout Germantown. There are some instances it may not have been exactly done that way. You can look at the old Kroger over there, we're backed up to Sonning, things of this nature. Those worked well to a certain degree, but this, once again here, I tend to agree with Mr. Bacon, is that it's just too intense to be backed up to a RE zoning, and that going across Poplar to the north needs to be something along the offices. So therefore, I'll be voting no for the rezoning.
Mr. Hernandez.
I'm also going to be voting negative on this application.
Ladies and gentlemen.
I admittedly did struggle with this decision, though. However, though, I heard very good arguments and very good justification, persuasive justification on both sides of it. I think at the end of the day, though, I really couldn't find sufficient justification that would warrant the rezoning. Certainly, I can't find that any mistake was made originally, but the changes in the neighborhood, there are 4 criteria, and depending on how one interprets those criteria, could either make it go either way. But my interpretation is that there's not been sufficient enough changes in the neighborhood to warrant the rezoning to C2.
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, we talked about this over and over, that we're here to look at the rezoning and not the end use of the site. However, after looking at, there's a site plan that's required for us for a reason, and the reason is so that we can have an idea and understanding of what may go into that site. So some of the things that were brought up tonight is the traffic issues are unresolved or are fluid, or however you want to say it, there on Forest Hill, and how we're going to get people in and out of there, out of a end user like Chick-fil-A. The narrow Forest Hill, we talked about that's in the plans to expand, but no real plan there to expand it. If there's funding and if there's adequate time to do that, maybe in 3 or 4 years to expand it, but no real plans to it. But I don't agree that the area should be zoned agriculture. I think it should be zoned something else. That's not the use like we talked about. It's kind of a stuck area there. But with the site plan as it is, and like I said, there's a reason for it, I can't vote for it as the way it is right now, so I'm voting no.
Mr. Marsh.
Well, I echo a lot of the similar comments. My primary concern from a land use planning perspective is particularly the way this site's situated with Poplar and its diagonal nature and the position of the neighborhoods immediately east of this property, the 2 residential neighborhoods, one of which with Belle Fleurs that would be directly impacted because of the proximity of entrances across from each other on a day-to-day basis, but also the precedent for the property, the balance of Mr. Skinner's property immediately north of this that could then directly impact the Forest Hill Lane residential property. And that combined with the fact that the other zoning on the east side of Forest Hill Irene is office and office campus. I feel like certainly this area needs to be rezoned to more of a business or commercial type use. But I'm not convinced that now is the right time or that C2 is the right use. So I'm going to vote no.
Alderman Owens.
Well, my vote doesn't really matter anymore, so I'll.
Oh, yes, it does.
I think it's very evident. Thank you. And thank you. Your arguments were very compelling. They were well reasoned. I thought the presentation that you guys put forth was equally compelling. I have, the unique position of being on the Planning Commission and also serving on our legislative body, and trying to balance, as someone said, the needs of the city and the revenues of the city, but also the damage that could be caused to our long and some short-term residents. I think it's very evident, and I have some notes here, so forgive me, and I'll try and be brief because we're late. It's very evident that ag is not appropriate zoning for the property. Nor do I believe that residential is appropriate adjacent to a service station on Poplar Avenue. I think we can all agree to that. I hope we can all agree to that. So then the issue becomes, what is the appropriate zoning? And is it office? Is it commercial? Is there some limited commercial that could be here? I don't know the answer to that. I agree with Mr. Wade and with the planning background. I've worked here, I've served here, and I've seen a lot of good plans, and I've seen some plans that don't work so well. And my concern is this is a little bit forced, and I would prefer to see some step-down zoning into the neighborhood. I think that's a logical way to plan things. As much as I would love to see a Chick-fil-A, and my kids are probably going to disown me, but I just can't vote for this, and so I vote no.
Chairman Harless.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you. I have to wear my glasses to see. Whoever said I'm in my last quarter, the fourth quarter, I can relate. My comment before I tell you how I'm voting is that I want to thank you, each one of you, whether you were for it or against it, okay? Because you showed what Germantown's all about: reasonableness, communications, recognizing that your neighbor, whether it's good or bad, you had your opinion and you voiced it very reasonably, okay? Without a lot of emotion, but very logical. And I think that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the discourse that we want to have in our community. That's what makes our community special. So I applaud you. I also applaud those of you who sent petitions in, who sent letters in, who let us know your feelings, because that's the way it's supposed to work. We don't want to work in a vacuum up here. We want input from you. We want to hear your thoughts and your reasons. So again, I thank you for all of those things. Mr. Ross, I need to, recognize the denial is based on, okay, got it. I'm voting no also, and the reason for it, I'm a fan of Chick-fil-A, I might add, but it's not the right place for a commercial that appears to be shoehorned in. It doesn't flow properly. It doesn't feel right. I think all of the commissioners made some very, very good points, and I applaud them for their comments and their thoughtfulness. I know the hour is late, but again, I want to thank each of you for coming out and spending the time with us. The project is denied. We are voting against, as a planning commission, against the rezoning of this property at this time. And the decision is based on the reasons given by the commissioners. I got it. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time and patience.